Hey guys, myself Vasan. In this video, we'll deep dive into IAM. So navigate, you can just search with the service IAM and you would end up over here. So by default, you would just have a root account, a root user at the time of account creation, and any additional user we want to create on our own. So before diving into create a user, let's talk about the key components available within the IAM service. So one is a user, we have groups, we have policies, and we have roles. So first, the user. So user is an individual person who has access to log into your console, or they can directly do a programmatical calls via CLI, SDK, or whatever other terms. So first, let's see how to create an user. So once you navigate to the IAM, you would see users, and then you just all you need to do is add users. So you can add a user. So let's say the username as test, and I'm just giving an access key programmatic access. No, for now I'll just give the password. I'll just set a custom password. And let's say next permissions, and let's not add anyone to the groups or permissions or attaching existing policy directly. So I can just say create new users. Done. So let's also try to create one more user. Let's give it as test1 and password. Permissions, tags, and create users. So now I have created two users, user 1 as a test and user B as a test1. So now we have two users created in our console. Now I can form a groups, user groups, and then I can add those two users, the user A and B, to a groups. So to create a groups, let's give the user group name. Let's say test underscore group, and then I can add test and test1 into the user. So now again you could see like I have policies. So for now I will just ignore the policies, and I just created a group. Now let's try to log in as a test user. So to do that, let me navigate to the console. So let me give the alias name of the account. Let's do next. The username, test, and sign in. So now we have managed to sign in as test user. In our case, it's going to be an user A. So now let's try to create a simple S3 bucket. So I'm just navigate to S3. In case if you're not aware about what is S3 or what it is, we'll see that in the upcoming sessions. But you could see as a user, by default, I don't have any permissions. So you don't have any permission to list the buckets. I can't do any actions. In AWS, if you're creating an account, by default, that specific group or a user don't have any permissions to do any changes by default. In order to provide access or grant permission, we need to do something. That's where the thing called policies kicks in. The policy is more like a predefined set of permissions where we can define whether that action is allow or deny. There are two different types of policies. One is AWS managed policies, and then a customer managed policies. So you would see something called this cube shaped icon near to any policy name, which means it's AWS managed policy. The same can be cross verified under the type where it represented as AWS managed policies. So AWS provides a default set of policies for the wider use case. You can also have your own policies for your custom scenario based things. To simplify, so for now let's try to mount the policies. So we can add the policies either to the users or to the groups. So let's say, let me go to the test user, and you could see add permissions. So now I can add user to the group, or copy permissions from the existing group, or attach existing policies. So let's say for now I will provide the user an S3 full access, which means the user can perform any action that's related to the S3 specific. So this policies are generally written in JSON, where you can view like how it's working. In order to read how to read a policy or how to create a policy, we will see in the later part of this video. So now we have seen we can attach the policy to a user. So let's say review and add permissions. So now we have attached the policy to the user, and we could also see if I go back to the users and if I see test, and then we can see like what policy has been attached to the specific users, and we can also see this user is part of what groups. Now going back to the user console, so if I just refresh, you could see the user got access to the S3 related stuffs. So now I can go and create an S3 bucket. Let's say I'll try to create something like that, and just for simplistic I'll just create as that. Boom. So now as a test user I could able to create an S3 bucket. Whereas if you try to navigate to some other console like EC2 service, I still don't have an access, because if you recall, by default everything is denied, and I just explicitly allowed only the S3 related actions. Now if you recall, we created two accounts, the test and test1. So let me sign into the console as test1. So now I have logged in as test1, and if I navigate to S3, you could see by default test1 account also have any permissions to access any S3 calls. So this is the nature behavior of any user account. When you create a user account, unless we grant any permissions, that is via policy, then the user don't have any permissions to access over there. Now what we can try doing is, instead of providing access to the user 1 directly, we can also attach the policies via groups, so that whatever the user is adding to that group will automatically get the permission for it. So let's go to the groups, go over here, permissions, and you can say add permissions, attach policies. Let's attach the same S3 specific full policy access. Yeah, so add permissions. So now since we have attached the policies for our user group, and since the user A and user B been pointed to this so since user A and user B been pointed to this groups, both the users get permission for the accessing the S3 bucket. So let's verify that. So if I go now and if I just refresh it, now as a test1 user I got access to all the S3 bucket access, and the scenario for other services remains same, because we haven't provided any explicit access for the users to access any other service other than S3. So hope you got the understanding of what is user, what is groups, and what is policies. So groups you would mainly go when you want to manage users as a groups, and the scenarios can be like you have an IT team, and then you have let's say finance. In that case, all the IT related teams will be mapped over here. All the finance users will be mapped to this finance group, and the policies you have one policy for IT related and one policy for finance, and then you will map the respective permissions over finance and IT. So now here comes the part of roles. So roles can be a bit of a tricky part. So to take a example, let's say you have a user, you are a user. In person you are a human being, right? And then let's talk about a profession. So whenever you want to do a bakery, so you wear a hat of a baker. When you are doing a magician, at the time of his profession, he does wear the cap of as a magician. Just for fun, like if you are the Santa, you wear a cap of Santa, and then it's a temporary thing. You act as someone for a specific duration of time. So roles also something like that, where you are not actually owns that access full time, where you will temporarily assume that specific role for a short duration. That's the role comes into picture. So these roles either can be assumed by the users or can be assumed by the roles, and mainly the roles comes handy for the services, for the AWS services. So let's say you have S3 bucket, you have EC2 server, you have Lambda. Let's say if this EC2 needs to call S3 bucket for some specific reason, or let's say this Lambda should go and shut down this EC2 for some specific reason. So we need to grant a permission for this Lambda to say, hey Lambda, you have the full permissions to go and shut down this EC2 instance. Or you have full permission to say EC2, hey EC2, you have full permissions to upload a file in S3 bucket. So in order to achieve this, the roles comes handy. So what we do is, we say, hey EC2, you have the option to assume any of the roles to perform your specific action. So mostly when it comes to services, roles comes handy to make any call from one service to another service in AWS. As we saw in users groups, by default, any roles won't have any specific permissions. In that case, what you want to do is you want to attach the policies with a set of permissions to the roles, and either a user, groups, or services can assume that roles. So in real world, it's going to be like you have policies, you have roles. So roles can be mapped, this policy can be mapped to roles, and these roles can be assumed by user, service, and groups. So you have policies, this policy can be assumed directly by user and groups. So now we have seen the policy contains two different policies. One is the AWS managed, and the another is customer managed policies. Sorry. AWS managed and the customer managed policies. So how to create a custom policies or customer managed policies? Let's go back to the root user. How to create a custom policy? We'll go to policies, create policy, and we'll choose a service. Let's say S3, and let's choose all actions, and let's not specify anything resource at the moment. And you can also have a specific request conditions. Let's say this policy is effective only if they are coming from a source IP or a specific source IP, or if they are coming with an MFA required login or something like that. If you just leave it as empty, then it won't look for any specific conditions, but those things would come handy when you are when you want to see, like, have the restriction within your VPN only. You need the policy to be effective or something like that. So you can create a policy. Let's say I will keep it like S3 custom, and let's create the policy. So this is just a demo, like how you can create a custom policy. We will do a separate session in the next week to see like how to write a custom policy and what are the parameters involved in each. So you could see like we just have an S3 resource, blah blah things. So now what we can do, we can go to S3, or let's go for the user account. Let's go for the user account test1, and I can add permissions, and then within the attach existing policies, you can look for S3 custom over here and add permissions over there. So likewise, we can also attach our managed policies or custom policies, users, groups, and roles. So now to create a roles, you can go here and we can say create role, and then here you could see like for what you are going to create a role. So you see like something called trusted entity type. So this is going to become like where you want to attach this specific role. So do you want to attach it to users, which would be like a specific AWS account, or do you want to attach these roles to a specific AWS services like S3, EC2, where you want to attach that role, right? So let's say I want to attach a role to an EC2 Lambda, or you can also have all the services listed over here. So based on your use case, you can write it down. So let's say I want to create for an EC2, and if you go for EC2, we can see like for this specific role, what policies you want to map or what policy you want to attach. So same as like user, same as like groups, roles also don't have any specific permissions as default at the time when we create. So you want to explicitly attach a policy. So let's say I want to give a permission of S3, right? The custom policy which we created. So that by assuming this role, any EC2 server, if that assume this role, can do any specific action related to S3 because we provided an S3 full access over here. So we can provide the role name, let's say S3 for EC2, and then you could see like how the trusted entities looks like and create a role. So this comes more handy when you're going with serverless services, like you would be planning for an automations, like let's say you would be having Lambda and you want to go and turn off the EC2 instance on a timely basis, or you want to upload the bucket or delete the bucket contents on the S3 on a timely basis, or let's say you want to do some specific actions like an user creation or some other purpose. So for all this Lambda, you would need to provide a permission to perform the actions for EC2, S3, user, or any other services. So in that case, so what you will say is, hey Lambda, go and assume this specific role, and in this role you will provide the policies attached, and so that the Lambda can perform these actions. So I can quickly show you like how you can make an EC2 to assume a role. So I can show you over here. So if I go for EC2, let's try to launch an instance. Let's say test. I'll choose a default one as it is. So we have the free tier eligible one. Let me launch the instance. So since it's just for a demo purpose, I'm not spending much time on how to launch an instance and the key pair things. We'll see more detail in the upcoming videos. How can we make the EC2 instance assume the role? Is you go to the actions, security, modify IAM role, and you can choose the role which we created for the one, and you can say update IAM role. So by which we can create a role, we can attach a policy to the role, and now if the instance is if you try to connect to the instance, and if you manage to go over there, then you can able to do any CLI actions or API commands from the EC2 without any AWS credentials to access through. Cool. So there is one more thing. So far we have seen about policies which you can create. Let's say you want to create a custom policies, and if you don't want to link that custom policies by default to any other users, in that case, or in other way around, let's say you have only one user as a super admin, and you want to create a super admin policy only for the specific user. I don't want to be used by any other users. So in that case, there is something called as inline policies that will come handy. So if I go for IAM, okay, and you can navigate to that specific user. So let's say I go for test, and I can go to permissions, and you would see something called as inline policies. So inline policies is specific to that specific resource. So in this case, it's only specific to the user. And if I'm going to create any inline policies, no one can assume that policies, or the policy can't be mapped to any other resource like an EC2 or groups. No. So it's just created for the specific user, and only this user can be assessed. And let's say if you want to restrict this specific user to use that policy within the trusted VPN, then you can just select source IP and provide the range over here. So this is important one when it comes to the inline policy. So let's say you can say inline policy. Fine. So you could see like I have managed an inline policy, which is so obviously the name can be any here, but I just created with this. And now I can't go to user test one for the case, and I can't say let's add the policy which we created for it won't come basically. So you won't see that in the search of the custom one. So in case if you want to do that, you need to again go to the inline policy and create explicitly for this specific user. So if you have an edge case where you don't want to any other users to assume your policy which you are custom creating for your use case, and if it's just for the specific users, then you would use this inline policies. Cool. So that's it, guys. That's it for today's one. So hope you understand the concepts of IAM. We have seen about users, groups, roles, policies, and trusted entities. In next video, we will deep dive into the IAM policies more in detail, like what are the options available, how complex we can get into it, and what are the do's and don'ts for the IAM policies. See you in another video. Until then, tada bye bye from Vasan.